Here we are. Although I never imagined I would be cutting off my dad and his new wife. After all, directly outside my door they are standing now. But let's go back a little to better appreciate how it arrived at this stage. I started it when I was 14. After a protracted cancer fight, my mother, Julia, died. She was everything for me. We were quite close. She was my best friend, not only a parent, really. We would do everything together, from cooking to movie binge watching and weird topic discussion. She was only one of those who brightened life, you know? Her death felt like someone had switched off every light. My world stopped, and for a long period, I felt like I was groping around in the dark. Dad, Paul, was not very helpful. Emotionally, he was simply absent-minded. He seemed to have walled himself off somewhere, unable to let any emotions show. I understand that everyone grieves differently, but he hardly tried to be there for me. Rather, he began to move in ways that hardly matched me. Not exactly. I recall thinking that he seemed almost ready to go forward, since Mom's death seemed to be only a sad detour he had to negotiate. It felt strange, not as though I wanted to jump to judgments. He first saw Marie about 3 months after we lost her. Though I'm really convinced they had something going on even before Mom passed, seeing is only brushing it lightly. Though Mom was still with us, there was something about their behavior toward one another and their words that suggested something about substantial evidence. Like an open secret, only I could see, as I was the one experiencing the suffering while he laughed with another woman at midnight. I would be lying in bed trying to fall asleep, and I would hear them in the kitchen laughing as though life was exactly normal. Marie was most evenings staying at our house 4 months after Mom passed away. It felt as though I had not even had the time to consider one significant life modification before another was being urged upon me. I hardly had time to process why some stranger was rapidly joining our life, let alone heal. It seemed as though I was being deleted right with Mom. Marie would arrive sporting a false smile and this artificial sweetness that was quite difficult to swallow. She would try to strike up a small conversation, prepare breakfast, and present herself as though she belonged already to the household. Then they broke me with their news, announcing their engagement on my 15th birthday. Simply visualize it. Trying to grin and find some pleasure on a day that had lost meaning without Mom around, I was already battling through the day. Before I could even get ready, they dropped it on me. "We're getting married!" Paul grinned like he had won the jackpot, saying, "We have some exciting news to share, Dot." They seemed so content with themselves. This was exactly what I should have been satisfied with, but all I sensed was wrath. I simply got up, took the cake they had given me and turned it right onto the floor, not even considering it. Everywhere there is frosting and decorations destroyed. It was the only way I could demonstrate to them my hurt and resentment. I left, slammed the door behind me, and 3 days later returned home. Trying to get my mind straight and make sense of the reality that Paul and Marie decided to make it all about them on my birthday, less than a year after losing Mom, I crashed at a friend's house. Why I left, or why I was offended, eluded them. Like it was out of nowhere, they really acted startled. I had to return at last. Paul had obviously begun to lose it, and I believe my friend's parents were close to phoning the police to claim me as a runaway. I returned, terrified every step and ready for more of the same, and they behaved as though nothing had happened, as I had anticipated when I returned home. Though things were not good, they were smiling, being all lovely, like we were meant to ignore that they had trampled over my anguish with their happy news. And they grew worse. One day, when I returned home from school, everything changed. The house resembled something my mother had never even lived in. Her images had vanished. Her wardrobe, including small items like the coffee mug she used every morning, all of which vanished. Although initially I assumed it might just be in storage, Marie and Paul had thrown much of it away. They seemed to be trying to pass off that she never existed. Marie had the courage to glance me in the eyes and declare, "It's time to move on." Move on? She was gone, and here they were, handling her like a memory that had to be thrown under the rug. I was hardly beginning to process this. I vanished. That they had deleted her and packed her existence as if it were a piece of unwelcome furniture astounded me. On this one, I battled fiercely and managed to preserve a few items: a necklace, some secret pictures, and some letters she had sent me when I was younger. Everything else, though, vanished, recently left. Then, as if that wasn't enough, they started prodding me to call Marie Mom. I'm not sure how much this grieved me. Paul would give me a protracted lecture about family unity and how rude I was every time I used her first name. Still, I didn't give a damn. She never will be, and she was not my mother. They couldn't just bulldoze through what little of Mom I had left. I was clinging to it. Marie even began introducing herself as my mother every time we went out. I corrected her exactly every time, usually sounding like a broken record. No, you're not my mom," I would say, but I didn't care. For me, it was a relationship to the person who had been at my side from the start, not only a title. Nevertheless, she would not stop even after I corrected her several times. She refused to recognize the truth, that all I wanted was to retain my mom's position in my life, to have some portion of her memory in a world that looked hell-bent on deleting her. I was just some rebellious youngster, a teenage acting up for no reason. The house was intolerable by the time I reached 16. I spent weeks not talking to any of them, only leaving my room when I really had to. I avoided meals, stayed out late, and for a while I felt as though I no longer really lived there. Paul aimed at fixing things, as he put it. One evening, he came to my room discussing trying to bring the family back together, but it felt so false, as he seemed to not even know why I was offended. He merely wanted the fight to end and the peace restored, but he did not want to really know or value why I was hurting. I reached 18 finally and headed for college. It seemed like freedom. I interacted low-key with Paul and Marie, only phoning or messaging when absolutely needed. It was not petty or dramatic. I simply couldn't handle acting as though everything was good when it wasn't. I felt like I could breathe without them hovering over me, guiding how I should feel, who I should call Mom, for the first time in years. But naturally, that was not the end of it. Not by a long shot. Things thus began to seem normal after I arrived at college. I was not obliged to dodge strange expectations or walk on eggshells. Paul and Marie were kept at arm's distance, with a few texts and maybe a call on the odd vacation if I felt fit. That did not appeal to them. Particularly, Marie felt that was unacceptable. Every few weeks, she would write these lengthy, emotional messages, guilt-tripping me for not being more involved in family life, and declaring things like, "We miss you so much, it's not the same without you." But it was not about missing me. It was more like she wanted to preserve the illusion of the perfect family she had entered. She sent me one especially nasty note once. I remember just gazing at my phone and thinking, how many times do I need to tell her she's not my mom? She really wrote, "I know you're busy, but I'm still your mom, and I'll always be here for you." Frustrated, I threw my phone aside and paid her message no attention. But it didn't stop. She persisted in trying and pushing. It was draining, as she believed she could compel herself into a character she had never seen, and never would. In my second year of college, several years later, I ran across Sarah. She was everything I needed: understanding, friendly, and most significantly, she refrained from pushing me to reconnect with Paul or Marie. I was honest about my familial problems right away, and she valued that. She let me run things my way. She never once advised that I make up with them. Things between us progressed fast, and even though I wasn't happy about it, I knew I had to inform Paul by the time we were engaged. If he heard the news from me instead of via the grapevine, I reasoned it would be better. I thus sent him a brief, straightforward text. His answer was exactly as expected. He contacted me right after, sounding all astonished, and said, "Why didn't you tell us you were seeing someone?" Calmly, I told him that my personal life was not truly theirs, and that I saw no need for keeping them informed on every aspect. That did not go over nicely. He hung up on me, obviously annoyed, but really I assumed that was the end of it. Naturally, though, Marie couldn't let that slip. A few days later, she performed her usual behavior, made everything about her. She shared this lengthy, embarrassing Facebook post on her great delight at her son's marriage. She wrote about how excited she was to be a grandma and about her pride in me for having located someone like Sarah. The worst part? She pasted a photo of Sarah and me, Since I had never sent her any pictures, I have no idea how she came onto it, but it was there. I exploded. Acting as like she had been in my life all along, like she was entitled to be in my relationship, she had the nerve to call herself Mom again. I said just under her post, "Just to clarify, I'm not your son, and you won't be a grandma to any of my kids." I don't think I've ever pushed post so quickly in my life. I couldn't let it slip. The drama grew more intense in minutes. Paul phoned, clearly enraged, complaining about how rude I was and how I had embarrassed Marie before her friends. He persisted in accusing me of disrespecting my mother. That was it. Straightforwardly, I questioned him. "Who are we talking about here? My mom has been dead for about 10 years. He paused momentarily, then started this entire sermon on family and unity and how we should stick together. At that point, I stopped listening. I hung up saying I wanted no more conversations with either of them. I was simply worn out by the continual drama. I was not trying to be petty. That call started what would eventually become complete no contact. I ignored messages. I even blocked them on social media. I never answered calls. It seemed possible for the first time in years. I assumed that would be it. They were gone from my life. 3 years passed without conflict. Together, free from all that turmoil, Sarah and I created a life. And then the past came roaring back into our lives just as everything seemed solid and steady. Sarah and I expected our first child. She was 8 months pregnant, and we were busy preparing the nursery, choosing names and simply enjoying this wonderful period together. It seemed like a new chapter, a real family I could guard from all the turmoil I had gone through. Still, they showed up one morning. I will not forget it ever. We were lounging at home on a sunny Saturday. The door knocked, and at first I gave little thought to it. Perhaps it was a neighbor on stop-by or a package, but my stomach fell as I peered through the peephole. Paul and Marie were standing on our threshold, gazing about as though they belonged. They had no reason to know where we lived. I had not told them my address. They had somehow located us, and now they were here grinning as though everything was exactly normal. I simply stood there for a time, peephole style, peering at them. It was unbelievable. When Sarah called from the kitchen inquiring about who it was, I advised her to stay put. Particularly in her condition, I wanted her to avoid handling anything. At last I opened the door, but just a crack. I had not intended to invite them in. Marie started chatting, grinning too brilliantly, bringing out some sort of gift bag like it was a casual visit before I could even inquire what they wanted. "We wanted to see you, Liam," she replied, using my name as we had discussed yesterday. "We wanted to mend our relationship before the baby arrives." I didn't lose my anger or yell. "You should leave," I murmured after simply glancing at them. They did not move. Paul stared at me, his face contorted with this false look of compassion, and continued, "We just want to meet Sarah and be a part of the baby's life." I felt my tolerance failing. I shut whatever stupidity they were about to utter by slamming the door in their faces. Still, that was insufficient. A few days later, I learned they had gone farther. 5 minutes from us, they had purchased a house. You really did read correctly. Presumably attempting to force their way back into our lives, they actually relocated to our area. It was not only annoying, it was somewhat eerie. When Sarah and I discussed it, she seemed exactly as freaked out as I did. I thought I was failing to shield our soon-to-be family from these unrelenting invasions. Though I wasn't sure I could ever do it, not after all they'd put me through. My therapist advised I think about bringing them in to try to rebuild bridges. Then Marie tagged me in another Facebook post, as though she hadn't already violated every line. I retained an account to stay in touch with some old college pals, even though I wasn't really active on social media. When I received the alert, I assumed it was more of her usual stupidity around missing family or hoping to reconnect. But no. She turned all around. She posted images of their new house with the caption, "A fresh start for our family." Her post this time was a full-fledged essay about how thrilled she was to be near her son, how she could not wait to help raise her grandchild, and all throughout she kept calling herself Mom. It was upsetting. She even posted pictures of me growing up, ones I would never have shared with her, and images she had no business possessing. Old school images and baby pictures. It was as if she had gone through all she could find to create this picture of a loving family. The remarks on her post were equally unpleasant. It was like a communal hallucination, a vision she was desperately holding to, and I was simply a piece of her puzzle. Her friends were all boosting her, saying things like, "It's so beautiful that you're reconnecting with your son," and "You're going to be such a wonderful grandma, Marie." I showed Sarah, and in seconds her countenance changed from uncertainty to fury. Glancing at me, she said, "How is she doing all this without even talking to us?" I came up short with an answer. Though I was already enraged, Sarah's response helped me to become even more determined. This changed from simply me now. It was about our family and the infant we were ready to bring into this life. I was not about to let Marie stomp all over our limits like she had done in her early years. I thus performed the only action I could think of. I never handed you these images. I just wrote a note on her post wondering where she found them. I thought that would close it, but naturally you are not my mother, and you will not be involved in the life of my child. She erased my reply within minutes, and I received this extreme guilt-tripping message from her. Pages and pages about how I was hurting her, and that she was just trying to do what's best for the family, when Marie even had the gall to say, "I'm doing this for your child's future, Liam. Do you not want their family to be loving?" I blocked her after staring at her message, feeling a mixture of contempt and anger and then doubt. Marie's blocking ought to have marked the end of it, but naturally it wasn't. Paul called, enraged right away after I blocked her. He began with how unreasonable I was being and how Marie was just trying to be part of the family. Then he continued with the same words I had heard for years, but this time he made it plain he thought I was the issue, that if I would just accept Marie as my mom, everything would be great. I could have had it. I had not done it in a long time, but I really yelled. No matter how many houses they purchased nearby or how many false family postings Marie created, I told him straight out Marie was never going to be my mother. I informed him this was the last straw. There would be repercussions if they continued to push themselves into my life. He tried to act the victim as usual. "Liam, you are separating this family. How much does Marie love you, really?" That served to accomplish. The boldness astounded me. "I'm pulling this family apart?" There was a pause, then he said something that made me go cold. "You tore it up the second you let her erase everything about Mom." "Your mother is no more, Liam. Marie is here now. That was it. Your family is hers and you have to grow used to that." I hung about. I had given it up trying to get him to see sense. Of course, he could live in this fantasy in which Marie was my mother. I was not going to participate, though. When I returned to Sarah and told her everything, we simply sat in quiet, trying to understand how far everything had gone. We knew deep down for some time that we had to cut them out entirely. These days, this went beyond my emotions and personal experience. It was about shielding our infant from the kind of turmoil and control Paul and Marie carried with them. Going no contact, though, was not going to be as easy as I had thought. Knowing where we lived, they were 5 minutes away. They had already begun coming up without warning and sharing my early pictures without permission. I agreed with Sarah to shut down everything on social media. We changed our accounts to private, unfriended anyone who might forward material to them, and even asked friends and relatives to keep things quiet. It felt terrible, but at this point, we had no choice. The next several days were tight. Every ding from the security camera or knock on the door had my heart pounding. To make sure we would know should they try to show up once more, we even purchased a new security system. I could see Sarah's stress level influencing her. It made me feel as though I had somehow pulled her into a disaster that ought to have been left behind. Like a failure. I knew nothing else to do, though. I could not control their unrelenting nature. We experienced another jolt just when things appeared to be calming down. Saturday morning, and Sarah and I were having breakfast, savoring a rare quiet moment. She was 8 months pregnant, and we were discussing future plans and baby names. At the door came a knock then. Perhaps it was simply delivery, but my heart dropped when I peered out the window. It were they. Here, once more. Marie and my father were there on my porch, utterly unaware of the fact they had been cut off from my life. I advised Sarah to stay put since I wanted her to avoid handling it, but my stomach turned at the way she gazed at me, the anxiety in her eyes. I opened the door just long enough to view them without letting them in. Paul mentioned first. "Liam, we have to chat." I said nothing. I merely stared at them, attempting to retain a blank face. "Why are you here?" I questioned. Though inwardly I felt anything but calm, my voice was steady. Paul sighed as though he were the one suffering inconvenience. "We wanted to just check on Sarah and you. We wanted to be here for you since we knew the baby was on her way." I nearly chuckled at how ridiculous that seemed. Having all they had done, they were attempting to present themselves as some sort of loving family. "We are done," I informed them. "You are not here entitled to be." Marie tried to step forward, clutching a gift bag as though it were a peace offer. "But we do not want you involved. Just a few things for the infant here. We wish to avoid starting problems. You don't need to drive us away, Liam." I shook my head, not looking at the bag. "Take that and go." Then Marie followed her usual behavior. She tried to guilt-trip me while I did not want anything from her. Her voice softened, and she started to cry as she said, "I simply don't know why you hate me so much. I have always sought to be right by your side." I almost laughed. "You have always been treated like my own son." "Had you treated me like your son?" I kept going. I felt my blood start to boil. "You moved in the second you tried to wipe my mother from our lives. You tried to take her place, and today you seem like the ideal grandmother." Paul intervened at that time, trying to cool things down as though I were the one acting irrationally. "Liam, family is what we are. Families argue, but that does not mean you can just cut us out. That was it for me. We are here because we care about you. If you did, years ago you would have respected my limitations. No, though, it always comes down to what you and Marie want." I realized then that I had had enough. "You cannot push your way back into my life just because it would be convenient for you." I advised them to go, for real this time. "We are done with our conversation. You had to leave. Do not come back." They first did not move. Marie began to cry more intensely, and Paul simply shook his head as though he could not believe I was the irrational one. It seemed as though they believed I would change my opinion given enough time. I locked the door in their faces at last and slammed it. I heard them chatting outside as I stood there momentarily catching my breath. Nothing they said mattered to me. I turned off listening to them. When I returned to the kitchen, Sarah was standing there, clearly concerned. "Are they lost?" she said softly. "Not yet, but they will be," I said, pulling out my phone. I had finished being polite. I got the cops on a call. I was not going to continue allowing this degree of disrespect. Their crossing of so many boundaries marked the last straw. My estranged father and his wife were trespassing on my land and not leaving, I told the operator. Not long afterward, I noticed blazing lights outside. I didn't go back out to chat to them. From the window, I observed as the cops advised Paul and Marie to depart. Marie attempted pleading, naturally sharing some sob tale about just trying to see their son. But the cops were not receptive. They left a few minutes later after last receiving the word. I felt a flood of relief when they left. It was about at last grasping control over my life, not only about their departing my house. I felt, for the first time, as though I was genuinely safeguarding my family. Sarah and I settled down that evening to have a lengthy conversation. Both of us understood this was not finished. Paul and Marie were not the kind to abandon without thought, particularly given their close proximity currently. Once the baby arrived, we had to learn how to guard both of us. Although we thought about pursuing a restraining order, we understood that would not be simple without more proof of harassment. Still, we were ready to go to great lengths to keep them off our paths. I was about to let them destroy the life Sarah and I were creating. I wanted our child to grow up surrounded by healthy individuals attempting to control their path into our household. Though it meant totally excluding my own father, I understood what I had to do to keep my family safe. I thought perhaps, just maybe, that was the end of it when the cops advised they leave. After the cops became involved, most individuals would retreat, But Paul and Marie were tenacious and unsure about when to give up. Though a few quiet days passed, Sarah and I were still on edge, waiting for their next action. Every time the doorbell rang or I received a warning from our security camera, my heart surged. Constantly bracing myself for their next try, I felt like a prisoner in my own house. Several days later, we received a letter in the mail. It came from a lawyer, their attorney. Opening it made me nearly laugh. Instead of the half-expecting restraining order or anything, it was a letter asking mediation. Like we were on some horrible reality show, they were quite attempting to compel me into some family counseling. Saying I'd cut them off without reason, the letter presented me as the problem and said it was time for all of us to sit down and make amends for the sake of the baby. Sarah merely shook her head in astonishment when I showed her the letter. "What do they believe this involvement represents?" She scowled and said, I said frustratedly, "Guess they think they can guilt us into sitting down with them. They cannot really think this is going to work." We discussed it and realized we couldn't simply discount the letter. There's no way I'm doing that. We have to legally handle it in the correct manner. We thus contacted our own attorney. He comforted us that we had every right to refuse. Mediation was only a request and could not be pushed upon us. He then raised something else, though. Given all that had transpired thus far, he advised we give filing for a restraining order some thought. I supported it completely. I quit allowing them to perform their antics. Not as simple as I had imagined, though, was applying for a restraining order. More proof would have helped to demonstrate their harassment of us. Yes, the police's visit was helpful, but by itself, it wasn't sufficient. That's when our attorney advised something I wasn't happy about. We might have to let them make another move. Though something that would clearly establish a pattern of harassment, he meant nothing dangerous. The thought disgusted me. Sitting around waiting for them to show up once more was last what I wanted. But we would do it if it meant safeguarding my family for eternity. They did not disappoint either, like clockwork. Sarah and I were arranging baby clothing and hanging some decorations in the nursery about 1 week later. The doorbell rang just as we were about done. My heart fell. To find out who it was, I hardly had to glance at the camera either. Indeed, Paul and Marie were there at the front door with more gifts, and I reached for my phone to contact the police once more, but Sarah stopped me. "Let's record this," she urged. "Our attorney requires additional proof, right?" I despised her for being right, but I knew this was the best approach to address it. I thus opened the door just enough to inform them I intended not to let them in. I had my phone with me to make sure the camera got everything. Of course, Paul spoke first. "Liam, all we wanted to drop off for the infant was some stuff. We considered perhaps we could talk, clear the air." I stared at the mound of baby items in his arms, disgusted and angry at the same time. "I want nothing from you," I answered, my voice firm. "I told you to leave us alone," Marie said, jumping in to attempt her customary sympathetic card. "We are not seeking to stir conflict. All we want is to be in your life. You cannot keep driving us away, Liam." "Yes, I can. I will also." Paul's cheeks turned scarlet. "You're not part of my life, Sarah's life, and sure as hell not going to be part of my child's life." Though he was clearly barely holding it together, he maintained a steady voice. "Liam, you're acting irrational. We are family." "No, you are not," I said, each word precise and unambiguous. "Inside this residence is my family. Our baby is Sarah, and my family is her." Marie started crying once more, but I was done feeling bad, done feeling like I was the one who had to make things right. "You are simply folks I used to know." They had persisted, and now they were receiving what they were due, nothing. Pulling out my phone, I said, "I'm calling the police. You should depart." This time, they avoided conflict. Paul mumbled something under his breath, and at last they turned and headed back toward their car. As I watched them go, I felt as though I once more had actual control over my life, first in years. When we forwarded the video to our attorney, she said it was exactly what we needed. Our paperwork was done in a few days, and the restraining order was filed. Though it wasn't a quick fix, it was a major step on the correct path. I thought I was at last acting to keep my family safe. Over the next few days, I came to understand something crucial. This was about building a safe, consistent existence for Sarah and our child, not only about separating them. Growing up in a society where my child was compelled into a connection with individuals solely concerned with control and manipulation was unacceptable to me. Protecting children from that meant excluding my own father permanently, even though it meant sacrificing something. Naturally, though, I knew that Paul and Marie were not the kind to give up readily. Their ultimate response was not going to be a restraining order. Not long after the injunction was in place, we also heard from friends and relatives informing everyone of their version of the tale. This concerned the peace in my family, not about them. Sarah and I agreed to remain silent and let them say anything they wanted. The people who counted would see through their lies finally. We knew the truth. And even in cases when they did not, I was cool with it. I was not going to waste my energy attempting to make anyone else understand for the first time. I had discovered the hard way that some individuals would believe anything they wanted, independent of the truth you presented them. It was the best thing we could have done. We concentrated on getting ready for the birth of our baby. Paul and Marie at last had to back off with the restraining order in place, and we were able to bring our infant into a safe, quiet house. Every time I looked at my child, I found fresh direction. Like my mother had been for me, they were now my duty. I was resolved to be the parent they could always rely on. Over time, I found myself thinking about my mom a lot. I considered her reaction to Paul's treachery and her support of me during all of this. Strangely, I felt more like she was than I have in years. I felt like I was honoring her memory since she had always urged me to stand up for myself, defend the people I loved, and do that for my new family. Paul and Marie will never stop searching for a way back into my life, but right now I know they cannot touch what counts most. I am exactly going to do. My family is mine to safeguard. I at last felt free, first in years, then